Hello and welcome back to another episode of What the Hell Do You Do? The series where we explore the interesting and unique ways that people make a living. Today we are back in our studio and joined by the lovely and talented Matthew Kimura.
You're very kind.
And I'm super excited to learn more about what Matthew does, but of course I have no idea what you do. So Matthew, what the hell do you do?
I am a food stylist.
Okay.
Yeah. So I basically, I make pictures, or I make food for pictures or video commercials, and I just make food look beautiful.
That's awesome.
That's what it is, basically.
I feel like food photography and food styling was something that always kind of intrigued me while I was still studying photography in school, but it seemed like almost unreachable because it seemed like you would always hear that there's these like little hacks and these special tricks that go into food styling. So I was like, how do you even get involved? So I have a lot of questions that pertain to like the nitty gritty details.
Bring it on.
But to start, I'd love to hear just what you do day to day. Like what would a week look like for you?
So I'm an independent food stylist. Like I'm not part of any kind of representation. So some of my time is spent up responding back to clients and agencies who are looking to get a job done. And so I spend my time scheduling, and then a lot of it is also spent shopping. So I pre-shop for ingredients for a photo shoot or a motion shoot, and then on set. So I'm usually working directly with the client and the agency to get them what they want. Yeah. And that entails many different things. So if
you're booked for a shoot one day, how much preparation would go into it beforehand? Are you like testing out the recipe before? How much communication do you have?
There's not too much time for that. Okay. I mean, so on more complex shoots, we allot ourselves like a test day. And sometimes if there's something that I haven't done as much, I might think about the process and maybe do a little test at home, but there really isn't time for that as a food stylist. You kind of just gotta when you receive the job, you gotta figure it out and then get ready to shoot it. So sometimes there's a pre-pro involved where you talk to the clients on the phone and they might talk about specific things, but 90% of those meetings are talking about the background, the props, the lighting. Like food is also just a small element of that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So you're kind of like a little bit more independent. There's not necessarily like a lot of communication that goes on between you and the client in terms of the food directly.
Well,
you kind of come in and do your thing.
It varies. I mean, obviously, anything that I get hired on, the food is what they're selling. Yeah, so that's going to be the most important thing at the end of the day. They'll give notes, but I mean, there's a specific expectation about the work that they're expecting from me. So I just kind of have to really listen to what the client wants. Like that's the most important thing. You got to listen to what the client wants and deliver it.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because if something very specific isn't delivered.
Yeah. Well, I think also this is where like taking on a job that you can actually do extremely well is important. So I mean, you take all these steps, like we'll probably talk about it later, but like many steps, many years to get to a point where you are able to receive a job, know that you can actually deliver what they want, right? So I think that's important. What happens sometimes is if you jump too far in advance and accept a job that you might not be ready to accept, people can get nervous or they get emotional or things come out. And as a food stylist, you have to really not project. You have to project confidence because the client is expecting you to deliver something, and sometimes things don't always go smoothly, but they have to know that in the end, you're going to get to that point. So, and that's almost what they're paying for, right? They're paying for that level of professionalism.
Yeah, they want to know that you can just show up and like dive in.
Exactly.
And you can like attack it.
Exactly, and give them like the level of quality they are expecting to sell their products, right? That's kind of
That's good. And then in doing so, that's how you're going to stand out with someone and probably get more work or recommendations.
Yeah, a big part of that is the relationship building, right?
Yeah.
Once they trust you, you have to be able to consistently deliver the same quality every single time, right? So, does that make what?
Yeah, and it seems like slightly nerve-wracking, but it's just getting that experience and being prepared, I guess.
Being nervous is good, though. I think it shows like a give a shit factor that's really important. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, not at all. We love swearing on what the hell do you do.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Of course.
Okay.
But like that, I totally understand because even with my own work, I get so emotionally invested in it.
Yeah.
But I'd like to backtrack a little bit and
Yeah.
like let's pretend you were scheduled for a shoot. What kind of places are you working in? What time of day are you starting? And what does that day look like? How does it unfold?
So there's two kinds of places that I would ever shoot. One is inside a studio, and then there's a location shoot. So location shoot, typically, if somebody wants to shoot in a house, or if somebody wants to shoot in like the middle of a baseball diamond or something like that, like you have to. That would be a location shoot. But more times than not, you want to shoot in a studio because you have a controlled environment and you have a little bit more resources. Like when you go to a location shoot, you have to bring your resources to the location. So sometimes when
you say resources, could that be anything from like
it could be
kitchen tools and things to like warm things up, or mostly like props?
Well, so for instance, like if I'm working on a commercial and it's a location shoot, typically they'll rent out a truck specifically for me. So it's like a tailored food styling truck. Like I'm not the only one that uses it. Like any other like food stylists,
it's not Matthew's
who
truck.
That's
really
do
cool, though.
like
Okay.
who do those kinds of jobs. They rent out a food styling truck.
Cool.
Which has like a fridge, a freezer, like a deep fryer if you need it, like stove, oven, sink with like portable water and workspace. So you can actually physically store and prep and get things done so that, because the most critical thing on a motion shoot is that things have to obviously, like looking good and awesome, that's a given. But being on time, making sure that the 50 other people that are in the production aren't just waiting for you, like that's almost as much of a critical point when it comes to commercials. When it comes to like doing photography, generally we're in a studio environment. It's a little bit more slow paced and there's more fine tuning. There's more details. You can tweak things. You can get things to look in a specific way. So it's a different type of food styling.
Okay. So let's go back to kind of like the schedule of the day.
Yeah.
When would you arrive? What are the steps that happen?
Yeah, I like to arrive early.
Yeah.
So I get there at like 8:30 in the morning, roughly. And oftentimes I have an assistant. And so that assistant is usually with me. We offload all our stuff. We get set up as quickly as possible. And then we kind of figure out which thing to tackle first. Or if it's like motion, then they already have a preordained schedule.
Yeah.
So we focus on the shots that are coming up first on our list, right? So that we usually have about, if you get there at like, for motion, you would start earlier. You would start like at 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning, generally. So at that point, we have like 2 hours roughly to kind of get everything going. So it sounds like a lot of time, but like I'll be in there and working, and then the client will walk in and we have to talk. We'll talk and just do a little chit chat, and then they'll leave. And then people from production are asking me questions about even just like where should the truck be, or where can we bring the product in, or all that kind of stuff. So all that obviously takes some time, right, out of your prep schedule. So you have to think about how to allot that. That's why when you work on stuff like that, it's important to have like a good team of assistants that you trust and are reliable and work well.
Yeah,
right?
so they can like kind of take over in case you have to like
exactly
go appease like the director or whoever else you're talking to, just to go over those things.
Yeah, and I was an assistant, obviously, for a number of years, and I learned And that's the best way to become a food stylist, right? Is to learn from somebody who's really good at it, and then take that and then try and do your own work, right? So
make it your own.
So assistants that I work with, generally I'm looking for people that have a lot of culinary experience.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's really, really important for me to talk about the styling aspects and not so much about the cooking aspects. Like, I need somebody who has cooked 1,000 steaks working with me.
Yeah.
And then I can talk to them about the styling of the steak. But if they don't know how to cook a steak, then it's classroom time. Okay. And I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when people come to me from George Brown or whatever, they're like, I want to be a food stylist. I want to work under you. If they haven't worked in an actual restaurant or understand like the time management skills that you need in a restaurant, or how to organize food from a restaurant perspective, it's very difficult for me to work with them because oftentimes I need them to work faster than what they're doing. Yeah. Or they have to really think and be methodical. And sometimes that's really good. That's very helpful. Like, I appreciate that skill set as well, because details are important. Yeah. But basic people really have to have some experience working in a professional kitchen. If you want to skip that, then that's cool. But I won't be as adverse to hiring somebody like that. I can tell right away. You can see it in their work. Yeah. Between somebody who has worked and dedicated their life to food, and people who want to pick and choose what's fun about food. You know what I mean? Because like, being in a kitchen is hard. Yeah,
because you do have that time management aspect. Yeah. And then also, depending on where you're working, you are going to be like plating these dishes and making them really beautiful. And, you know, like kind of cleaning the side of the dish, positioning something in a certain way. So those are all things that you would definitely look for then an assistant. Big time. Not just someone who's like, I want to play with food. Exactly. That's really cool. So have you, the assistants, how many assistants do you kind of have in your roster?
So, I mean, it's always varying, but I have one key assistant that I work with 90% of the time. And then I have other assistants on the side who are generally, I've poached them from restaurants who are friends of mine, or they have like, they might be a little bit overqualified, like they can run like full restaurant, multiple kitchens with staff and stuff like that. But they might be in between a job, or they might want like a little bit of a break, and so like I get those people on right away because they're extremely efficient.
And they like want to exercise their skill set in a different way.
Exactly. And then the primary assistant, she was more like me in terms of my experience, like worked a lot in restaurants and stuff like that, so like has like that basic knowledge, but then also I think the motivating factor for someone like her was the same thing as mine, to become a food stylist and to do it the way that I did it, or the way that the person who taught me did it. So that's how we do it, because like anybody can call themselves a food stylist. Yeah. Right? Anybody can, literally. So how you define like what the expectation is, or what I expect out of myself as a food stylist, or what I expect out of my assistants, or the work that I expect to do, like you have to get there somewhere. And you can't really, I think they have courses at George Brown, but and there are people that teach those things, but they don't, they never can replicate what you need to do. It's not like being an athlete, but I'll give an athlete's analogy. It's like if you're gonna shoot like 1,000 threes a week for, you know, for basketball. I
was like, yes.
Like that, you have to practice that, right? 1,000 times in order to be somebody who is known for threes. And you have to do that over many weeks. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to make it. That's a bad analogy for,
I got it.
You got it? Okay.
I know, right. I understand. Yeah. Just like that consistency and just like working at it. So I have a lot of questions about your background, but I just want to finish up kind of like the, what your shoot day is looking like. So you have that first few hours of prep, people are coming in, you're starting to work on things. when it's coming closer to getting closer to the shoot time, what's happening?
So if I'm working with my assistant, then we're working on the elements together for the first shot. And what I'm trying to do is get to a point where I'm working on set with the stuff. So typically, I think maybe if we just talk about the stills, that might be a little bit more, make more sense. So typically, if I'm on a still shoot, I'm talking to the photographer, and if the prop stylist is on set, I'm talking to the prop stylist. So a prop stylist is somebody who pulls props, and we'll talk about it. So for instance, if we're shooting, a salad, right? We might talk about like how the composition is going to be or what kind of salad it is. And then they would have pulled props prior that the client was saying, like, we want something in like a teal green, or we want something in the gray tones or whatever. And then we'll pick something that's like beautiful that fits kind of like the size or what the composition. We get those on set, and sometimes I'll give a stand-in, or sometimes I'll just bring the elements and style it and then tweak it as we go. And so I work with the photographer has to work on their lighting. So they need time to do that. And so usually the first shot takes a little bit longer because everybody's kind of like getting settled in. You know, you're offloading from the car, like you're setting up for the day, like your assistant is like trying to look at all the recipes and trying to get the first one out for you to style, and then get the next ones ready ahead of time. They need to be one step ahead. I have to be, the prop stylist is trying to figure out, so we're trying to figure out a shot order. So, like a lot of times the shot orders are determined ahead of time, and sometimes that's for printing reasons or for deadline reasons. So in that case, we follow that, but it's less important to what's actually going to happen on the floor. Like if the flow needs to happen a specific way, maybe we're shooting, for instance, 3 shots that are shot at like a 3/4. So a 3/4 angle would be like you looking down at a table as though you're eating it. Like that's kind of how you would think about that. And then the last 2 or 3 shots are overhead or something like that. So if in that case, then we would try to do all the same angle so the photographer doesn't have to keep switching their lighting and switching once they get some things established. So there's that too.
So, okay, so you were talking about how people who generally have an interest in food styling have restaurant experience. So what was your path? Did you work in a restaurant prior?
Yeah. Well, I should say that I require it.
Okay.
It's
not necessary.
It's not necessary, but I find that and there are some exceptions to the rule. Obviously, I don't work with only like seasoned veterans who've worked in a restaurant for 10 years. I don't know if that actually translates the same way either, but that basic knowledge is important.
Okay.
So for me, my father owns a Japanese restaurant, and his first one was called Sasaya, and it was open in 1978, so before I was born. And there was only 3 Japanese restaurants at the time that were in the city.
Okay.
And then in 1984, he opened up Ginkgo, which we have today. So yeah, it's been around for almost 35 years or so. It's getting up there. So I kind of grew up in the restaurant industry, but it was never like, it wasn't like me and my dad working like as a little kid or something like that. It wasn't that type of food experience. It was more that was something that my dad did, and it was one of the many things that he did. And so that kind of translated for me into starting to like food a lot, but it wasn't like there was a process, right? And eventually, I think when I got into my early 20s, you finish university and you finish with an arts degree. Well, what do you do with that? Because there's no job that quantifies that. And so everybody goes back to college, which is something I did. And I started to do hotel restaurant management. We talked about opening up a restaurant. And then in 2004, I was doing those things. I was going to Humber for a semester, and then I ended up going to the Food Network.
Okay.
And interviewing somebody for a project, and then I found a way to get on as an internship.
Okay.
Process. That was initially how I got into like the food media world. This is back in 2004.
Sorry, you were having an interview at Food Network.
Or
you were
interviewed somebody.
Oh.
At the Food Network for a project.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there was this turn of events where you ended up interning for them.
Yeah. And so at the time, Food Network was being based out of Alliance Atlantis, which was, I don't know, I think it's been bought out, but they had a actual Food Network studio that they were building.
Yeah.
Similar to the one in Chelsea Market in New York.
Oh, cool.
So that's what they were trying to create, but do a Canadian version. Yeah. And that's when all the production of food shows started to come up. Yeah. So I found as a young person trying to find my career, very interested in that, because I thought, well, if I can work with the best people must be working on TV. So why don't I work with these people? So that's kind of my initial thought to work in TV, and it was a great experience because the Food Network was not like it is today. Mm-hmm. It was instructional cooking classes, but instructional cooking. Yeah. It was host personality based, and they had, very simple themes, but always I felt like I was getting a lot of educational content out of it. That for me, learning as somebody learning how to cook, and not necessarily knowing everything, it was great. It was great to learn.
So you learned how to cook through your experience there?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I mean, I'd worked with my dad in the restaurant for sure, so I knew how to cook Japanese food. Mm-hmm. But working in a North American kitchen and stuff, a lot of that beginning happened at that time at the Food Network.
Yeah, it opened you up to a new... Okay.
Yeah, little things how to break down a recipe for TV so that you had the segments ready, and you had a certain amount of sugar, and how you would measure that and stuff like that. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. How to toss vegetables, nothing. It was I was extremely green when I was at the Food Network. I just had a really positive attitude, happy to be here kind of thing. Yeah. A good intern. And I had some good mentors. I had a lot of people who taught me a lot about food. Yeah. So basic stuff.
Did you move up then from intern to a
No, I did. I ended up actually on Christine Cushing Live. I did. Cool. I was interning there, and then after 3 months, they had me on full time as the junior cook. Wow. So I was there for a bit. It wasn't so much my skill, but I'm really good at kind of listening to what needs to be done and trying to work at it, and I was interested and keen and didn't rock the boat and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I did that, and I did a couple other TV shows at the Food Network, but my dad and I had originally talked about opening up a restaurant. We found one in Quebec City, and when I was, I think, 25, we moved out there. I moved out there. My dad was back and forth. And so I left the Food Network stuff, went to Quebec City, and opened up a restaurant, a 200-seat Japanese restaurant in Quebec City, not knowing how to speak French, not knowing the laws, the language, the culture. So yeah, it didn't work out too well for me. It was a huge failure, massive learning experience. I was there for about 1.5 years, and then my younger brother, my middle brother Andrew, took over for me at the time, just because things were getting a little bit difficult between me and my dad, and I came back. And then at that time, I thought, I'm going to come back and I'm going to maybe do another skill set. Okay. Because the problem that I realized with food TV is that it wasn't an actual skill. It is a skill, but it's not enough of a skill to create a career. Now, having said that, there's a lot of people that do it, and there's a lot of people that have made a career out of it, and there's a lot of successful people for sure. Yeah. But for me, what I wanted to do, I felt like it wasn't going to garner the same kind of career opportunity.
I feel it's like you were kind of looking for a new challenge.
Maybe,
And you wanted to like mix things up a bit.
Maybe. I mean, it's not like I left the Food Network running 7 shows or anything like that. It wasn't, it was more. It was more, I wanted some growth. Obviously, the restaurant was an opportunity to grow.
Yes.
And learn a bunch of new skills. But, I learned a lot of stuff in that restaurant, but I didn't have the background, base knowledge to fully run a restaurant.
Yeah.
I didn't have 5 years experience running a dining room or anything like that. So every time you make a mistake in a restaurant, you just lose money.
Yeah.
It's fine to learn, but you learn by losing money. So it's really important, that was a kind of like something that I got out of that. I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
If this is going to be the situation.
So upon exiting sort of the restaurant world, the Food Network world, what was your decision? What steps did you take in order to, how did you decide you wanted to hit up or try out food styling next?
Well, yeah, so I did a bunch of restaurant stuff.
Yeah.
Then I went into working at Canadian Living.
Okay.
As a recipe developer and tester, and so I learned first about food styling in the form that I do it now.
Okay.
That's kind of where I first got because we were doing photo shoots all the time.
Yeah.
And that was only a year contract. And it finished, it was great. And then I moved on to CBC for a number of years. So while that was going on, I was shooting some of the food that was coming off the set on a little Lightroom off the side because I wanted to do the photography, and they let me do it, and I was doing both. And that kind of transitioned into a full-time job during contract work. But I needed to learn properly from somebody. I couldn't learn. And so I did a little bit of working in photography, but it just never, I think my passion and skill sets were not being utilized properly there because I couldn't motivate myself. It was internal. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. It was my inability to think or to reach another step or level that I had an expectation of what type of work I wanted to deliver. And I knew I wasn't hitting that mark, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So what happened was I was on a set as a photography assistant, and a really well-known food stylist was on set and was having some difficulty with her assistant being able to get stuff out to her quickly. And so she asked me to go for dim sum with another photographer, and I thought we were just going to eat like crazy. So I was really excited to eat, and then did this whole thing that I think you should become a food stylist.
She was the one who suggested it.
She was the one who suggested it. So at that point, I had known food styling through TV and stuff like that, but that's not food styling that, that was more like segmenting. And that was like something that anybody can do. Like, it's like I could take somebody from a kitchen and teach them basic knowledge, and that they could figure that out. That's, you just have to have a little bit of composition. But when somebody offered me that position to be an assistant, that's when I was like, okay, this is actually something that I could learn now. So that opportunity had to come at some point for me in order for me to get into this industry.
Yeah. How quickly did that transition then? Well,
it transitioned fairly quickly. She started hiring me, and I started to realize that I knew nothing about food styling. 2004 I started in food TV, so I had some knowledge about stuff that you needed to do for food, and I had cooking experience at that point and development experience, but I realized right away this is not gonna, like, what I thought I know, let's throw it out, because at the time I was like 32 years old, and I'm thinking my career is going nowhere. Like, it's not, and this is not for anybody else or all the great experiences I had. For myself, I just thought I need to push. There's some way to express. I need to express myself, but never having that outlet or creative outlet to properly do that was very difficult. And many people who are in arts industries struggle with that, is how to do something and make a living at it. And so when that opportunity came, I started to take it seriously. But I quickly realized that it's like the best way to do this is to check the ego at the door. Don't think you know anything. Assume from the ground up, okay, this I know nothing, and now I'm gonna start learning. And so to do that at 32, you have to really push yourself back, because in your late 20s and early 30s, you think that you've accumulated a certain amount of experience and that you're owed something, but then that's not what the reality is. The reality is that what is the actual reality? That's the question, right? So you have to identify that. What is your actual reality here? Are you, do you actually know how to food style, or do you think you know how to food style? Yeah. Does this person know how to do it? And is this how you can learn to do it? That's kind of a process there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But my goal was now starting to focus. And another assistant, a photography assistant named Rico, came up to me and said, do you do creatives? Would you like to do one? Mm-hmm. And I said, sure, let's give it a shot. And I said, you know what? I don't really know how to do drinks. So I didn't have a car at the time. I went to Chinatown, did some shopping, tried to figure out some inspiration for a drink. And I found these like little honey tangerines. We went to his house and we spent about 5.5 hours working on one drink to try to get it to look the way we needed to, and then we showed it to some people. And I thought, okay, so I think maybe I really need to do a lot of creatives now. Now I'm getting to a point where I probably worked for about 8 months, a year or so. And I had learned a lot, but I still hadn't done anything. I still hadn't styled anything.
You weren't hands-on yet.
Yeah, so we started, so then it started to become a little contagious. Then I started to think about stuff I wanted to style, and it was a creative outlet. And I worked with a bunch of photography assistants at the time. My work started to improve incrementally. And I thought, you know what, the thing that it's really important is that food stylists think, I need a drink, I need a hamburger in my portfolio, I need a soup. It's just like, fuck that. Like, you just need to style what is inspiring to you and get people to comment on it, so that you can see and also what is expected of yourself in the work. So I knew that a lot of the stuff I was styling, I would never show to people. It didn't matter. It didn't matter how much money I didn't have. I would spend whatever I had on creatives, because that was my education. That's the way you learn.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that to garner me work. I was expecting that to get me better. And better.
It was
and
just
better.
simply for your own experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the big, I think, break where that things started to really turn, and things had a lot of work started to really, like creative work, started to really look good. I started to become quite happy with it. But the one, I did a maple syrup creative with a photographer named Ryan Schultz. I don't know if you ever heard it. He's quite a great food photographer. Cool. And I had been working with him on set, so we had kind of a relationship. We're the same age. He's he's doing actually shooting the food, and he asked me to do a maple syrup creative. So we did that. We did 4 shots. They turned out really well. And then we did.
Can I ask you what your approach was for a maple syrup creative?
Yeah. So maple syrup
just as
creative.
A quick example.
Well, I didn't want to do pancakes with maple syrup dripping down them.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm like,
I wanted to show maple syrup affecting food in a couple or touching food in a different way. So I think we did a waffle that had, I found maple butter. So we used maple butter and caramelized banana or something like just like something that had a little bit of a tweak to it. Yeah,
it didn't have to be so literal. It was kind of using like the elements.
Exactly.
And it was then creating textures and...
Exactly. It was more artistic.
Yeah.
So we shot a waffle. We did a smoked cured gravlax, so maple syrup cured salmon. So it's almost like smoked salmon.
Yeah.
Think of it like that, but not smoked. It's like Scandinavian. It's pretty delicious. So we did that with like, I think gin and tarragon or something like that, and or savory, I can't remember. And then we shot 2 other we did a maple pie. I did like a sugar pie, and
making me so hungry.
Yeah. But so I thought maple syrup directly. Oh, and then we did a maple panna cotta. So you had a maple in a panna cotta form.
Yeah.
We had one in just like loosely on a waffle. Then we showed it with gravlax, and then we showed it with in a pie form.
Okay.
So I showed it in 4 different ways.
Amazing.
Different.
I'm so glad I asked.
So that's why that's and then I realized, and we both kind of chatted about this, and like the theme was very helpful to focus a creative on a theme. And then he's like, that went really well. He's like, and I was like, yeah, I'm really happy with these shots. But I didn't post any of that stuff. Like that was still stuff that I had kept, and I thought, if I get a website, I'll start posting it on that. But I didn't have Instagram. I didn't have any of that stuff. So then we did another one. It was chocolate, and that went extremely well. We did like 11 shots or something over 2 days, and the chocolate creative really, for me, was really inspirational, because I picked chocolate because I wasn't good at it, and I thought this was a good way for me to spend a lot of time learning. And then I also thought everybody loves chocolate. Who doesn't love chocolate, right? I love chocolate. Right, yeah. I mean, also it's a $93 billion industry, right? So to get into that industry, it's kind of interesting to make sure that you're familiar with it and understand it. I mean, I knew the properties, but like, did I make this before? Did I make that before? No, and I picked it. So we picked and did the same approach. We did a bark, like a chocolate bark, so solid form, and then a cake and just like a cookie with caramel in it, and like a bunch of different things that, and a lot of those turned out really well. Most of them we were very happy with.
Yeah. So those were kind of during your creative period, building up your portfolio, but really building up your skill
exactly
sets and
that's
experimenting with different things. So when did you reach that point where you were like maybe starting to get approached by different photographers, or you were approaching people you wanted to work with and really kind of turning it into a career, into a full-time thing?
It still didn't happen quickly. I mean, I in between those creatives, I did a job at Canadian Living. It was my very first job on my own. So things had kind of come full circle, and I didn't hear about that because it was for June. It was for a June issue. We shot it, I think, way back in November of the year before. And so as these creatives start coming out, and people start to see them more from Ryan's postings on Instagram. I didn't have Instagram still. Yeah. I didn't click in. Like it was like, oh, maybe should use that. Right?
I know. It took me a while to reach that point too. So
it does. It does.
You're like, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. You think everything's so overly precious, but at the same time, you do have to put out your content, right? And anyways, I didn't do it. So that stuff was being released by him. So then that started to get some interest. Yeah. And then I got a phone call, and I said, hey, just so you know, you got the cover of Canadian Living for June. And I thought, okay, so my first time food styling, I got the cover. That's really cool. Now it's time to make a transition, right? Wow. So I made the transition into food styling, and then I got no phone calls. So I was just sort of hanging out there. I was like, okay, what's happening right now? Yeah. So anyways, you figure it out, and then you slowly start to keep doing creatives at the same time and start getting some jobs, and then that's it. You're off and you're doing your own thing.
So who are you finding is hiring you directly, depending on, be it editorial, commercial, or stills? Who's reaching out to you to kind of provide you with the job or get your attention?
Well, I mean, for me, it's sometimes a photographer will often book me. So if I have a relationship with a photographer, they have their own preferred food stylist they'll work with. Yeah. I'll get calls. Or somebody from their representatives will call me. Sometimes the agency directly reaches out for the client. so it's a relationship with people at an agency, at an ad agency, or it's sometimes the client directly contacts me.
Yeah.
So, and that can happen in so many different levels and different ways. It depends on what kind of project it is. Sometimes the client will be like, if I know a client for a long time, like they might just like start texting me and asking me if there's dates that are open that I can work, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you just develop the relationship further from there.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. So finally, if someone wanted to get involved or they were interested in food styling, what are kind of, like, what would you suggest are their first steps, or how would you encourage them to explore that field?
I would say the first thing to do is devote your life to food.
Yeah.
Every single waking moment of it, and make sure that you have a good base of kitchen skills. Like, don't focus on the actual styling. Focus on the skill sets that are going to get you a hireable job with a food stylist.
Yeah.
It's not a clear-cut thing. I can't stress that enough. Very, very, very important to really work on your own skill sets.
Yeah, so it's not just like about the visual of the food.
Exactly.
It's cooking the food well up front.
Exactly.
And making all the different components.
Right, and understanding food, so that when you know how food should look, how specific food should look, if a client is asking you something, and you can know at least from a food standpoint, from a cooking standpoint, how to achieve that.
Yeah.
You might not know anything about composition or food styling tricks or any of that kind of stuff, but you can at least focus on what you know first, and that's how to cook something properly.
So it's not even about necessarily going to school. Like, if you just have an interest in it, you can just obviously look up stuff online, maybe like check out a couple books. Do you have anything to recommend, like material wise, that spoke to you, or not so much?
What I do is I go to the Good Egg a lot, and I'll peruse through some of the latest cookbooks, and if there's something that I find inspiring, I'll go from there. I use Pinterest for some stuff to create storyboards, but the problem with Pinterest is that nobody's paying for that. So if you're not paying for the image to look at an image, everybody sees the same image. So if you want to see like the most up-to-date, interesting stuff, you go to the bookstore and you take a look. You don't have to buy the cookbook necessarily, but you should go and look at the pictures that are in current cookbooks, because now people are paying a lot.
Okay. So then, having the basics skills with cooking and understanding food, what would you recommend for someone wanting to connect with like a photographer, or even just like an upcoming photographer who has an interest in food? Just, I guess, maybe hitting up people on social media, or...
I guess, yeah. I mean, if you're not in that world, I mean, there's so many more outlets now. I mean, there's like people who have their own Instagram blogs or bloggers or whatever, and people are always looking for people to do free things. So I mean, that's ultimately a way to do it. It doesn't necessarily translate. You have to kind of forge your own path, I think, with the background knowledge of how you're of doing things beforehand, right? Like cooking things, you know.
That's great. Well, do you have any final words to share with us?
I feel like I've been talking. I hope I didn't bore anybody.
No, not at all.
Thank you so much for listening to me talk about my food styling.
Perfect. And where can we find you?
You can see me on my Instagram handle. It's Kimura_sensei.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Great. And we'll link that down below. Well, thank you so much for watching another episode of What the Hell Do You Do? If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe for more of our upcoming videos. We're always working on something new. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you in the next one.